Maggio right here for you. What passion meets success, inspiring dreams come true. From entrepreneurs to hidden gems, each story shows what life can lend. Tune into 90.3, feel the vibe, get inspired too. What's up, Punta Cana, bringing dreams to you. Are you ready to dream, to reach for more? With stories that open every door. What's up, Punta Cana with Maggio right here for you. What passion meets success, inspiring dreams come true. From entrepreneurs to hidden gems, each story shows what life can lend. Tune into 90.3, feel the vibe, get inspired too. What's up, Punta Cana, bringing dreams to you. Entrepreneurs to hidden gems, each story shows what life can lend. Tune into 90.3, feel the vibe, get inspired too. What's up, Punta Cana, bringing dreams to you.
Every Friday at 7 p.m., Punta Cana Hits presents What's Up Punta Cana with Maggio, the #1 English talk show in the area, with the best that the Dominican Republic and the rest of the world have to offer. All right. Welcome to What's Up Punta Cana. This is Maggio, and we are here with another episode. And I'm super excited because tonight we have very special guests all the way from Nashville, Tennessee, even though it's not your original location. But I have here with me Latrelle and Kerry Farr, and they are the heads of In the Corner Ministries. Is that correct? And
in your corner
Ministries. And so when we look at this, Latrelle is a beautiful singer. Kerry, you are a beautiful preacher.
Thank you.
And so the two together make perfection, right? Like it's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
God did it. It was all him.
So tell us a little bit about that. How did God bring the two of you together?
We both were widowed in 2021, 10 weeks apart, actually. His wife and my husband passed. I was in Texas, and we'd never met before. But I had a nephew in Tennessee, and through him, he introduced us. And the Lord just worked that out beautifully. And I'm talking about when my nephew, I talked to him, and I said to him, I don't know what God has. And if he doesn't have anybody, it's okay because it's me and the Lord and we're good. But if he did, it'd be awesome if it was somebody in ministry. And then just a week later, my nephew met him, and he was led by the Lord to ask him, is there anything I can be praying with you about? And he said, a godly woman who wants to do ministry.
Ask and ye shall receive, correct?
So it just so happened that I was coming back to Tennessee to be on a television program. And he introduced us, and we started talking. And God confirmed over and over and over and over that this was his will.
And so you already had the ministry in place at this point in time.
Yeah, we'd had a television program called In Your Corner because of my boxing background. We'd been on the air for we were on Daystar and National Religious Broadcasters for like 12 years. And so we'd been doing television. And then when Trell came along, it was just a perfect fit, because she sang and we did the program. And so we used the music to draw people, and then we tell them about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Wow. So tell me about the box. So In Your Corner obviously has a significant meaning because you used to be a boxing coach.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, going from a boxing coach to ministry, were you always kind of in ministry, or did you get led there after boxing?
Well, I went to Bible college when I was a young guy in my 20s, but I struggled so much financially that I quit, and I was in the business world for most of my life. But I'd been an amateur boxer growing up, and when I was in my late 20s, I thought, well, I'll start a boxing team as a way to minister to kids in the community.
Oh.
And as an outgrowth of that, we ended up training, many world-class boxers and world champions, and traveled all over the world, met everybody you can imagine in professional boxing. So I use that as a tool to minister.
Wow. That's interesting, because a lot of times, we think and we look at things like, I often, use school and the education and the kids who attend the school to be a part of, is a way to get the message out there. And you working with kids, and then it leading to, more, those kids then going out, your ability to teach them at the same time that you're training them is interesting. How did you incorporate that?
Well, I just work with the kids and let them know I love them. And, it's interesting because I started way back, in about in the late 80s. And so some of those guys that I worked with, they're in their 50s and 60s now. And Latrelle will tell you, almost every week somebody calls me that has a need, preach a funeral for a family member, or to help them out of a circumstance they're in, or pray for some. So these kids are like they're grown men. Some of them are grandparents now, but they're guys that I work with from the time they were 10 or 11 years of age till they finished boxing, and we just have an amazing relationship with them. So it was relationship first, and then sharing the gospel on a regular basis.
When you were a young boy,
Yep.
how was it that you got into boxing?
My parents came out of the cotton fields of Alabama and Mississippi. They both lived on the state line. Mother Mississippi, dad in Alabama. Moved to Detroit, and I was abused so much as a kid. I can remember being 7 or 8 years of age, and I was from Alabama, so the black kids would chase me home from school. There was some old white guy, probably my age then that I am now, and I'm walking through the neighborhood, and he said, "Hey, why don't you hillbillies go back where you came from?" So we were not, they thought we were poor white trash. We probably were. My dad worked at General Motors, drank every dollar up that he made, and was saved at 42. But I grew up very hard, didn't have very much, and it was very rough on me. So because of the abuse I suffered as a child, I said, one of these days I'm going to learn how to use these, and nobody's ever going to hurt me again. So I learned how to box, and it gave me a great deal of confidence, but everybody started using guns and knives, and so this didn't work anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of doesn't work at that. It's not quite a fair fight at that point in time. But how old were you when you started boxing?
I went to the gym when I was 13 years old, and I was a timekeeper. You couldn't start until you were like 16. So my best friend's cousin was a 3-time Golden Glove champ. So I went, and in those days they didn't have a bell that rang automatically. I'd keep a stopwatch, and when it'd go 3 minutes, I'd ring the bell and I'd say time. And so I was the timekeeper for a year or two until I could start boxing. I was 15 or 16.
And in those years of you just keeping time, what do you remember being the most impactful on you? Because I think as a kid from 13 to 16, you're looking at a lot of people, a lot of training, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of hurt. And what was it that you connected with, that you remember the most, that really impacted you?
I think I was just so enamored with the sport of boxing and, the confidence that it could give me, that I became obsessive with the sport and became, basically it was a god in my life for probably 20 years. And now I look back and I've repented of that because, the people that I idolized, even Muhammad Ali and Jerry Quarry and Joe Frazier and all of those guys back in the day that were so great, they were men, and later they had, Parkinson's disease. And Jerry Quarry, a boxer that I idolized, died from punch-drunk dementia, and I think Ali did too. So I learned to place no confidence in the flesh, and that's what I was doing. I was making boxing my God, and And that was, it was not a good substitute because there's only one God.
Of course. And how far did you go?
Well, I was just an ordinary, amateur fighter. I didn't go anywhere. I was good enough to spar with some world-class professionals, but I didn't spend enough time in it. By the time I was 18 or 19, I was already married and having to make a living, so I had to give it up as a profession. But, I was just an ordinary tough guy that learned good technique and was able to teach others how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Did you graduate high school?
No, I didn't. I didn't graduate high school. I dropped out of high school and got my GED in the Marine Corps and went back to college later. So you can see what a misfit I was in those days.
No, I don't think it's. I don't think it's a misfit. So there's a reason why I asked this, because I'm like, here you are, you're around them, the boxers all day, and I've interviewed a boxer before who also ended up dropping out, but then he went back to school and he ended up going back and getting his master's degree. Yeah. But I think the interesting thing is that what was it that made you decide that you were going to drop out of school at that point in time?
Well, I was always in trouble. I was kicked out of school 2 or 3 times when I was a teenager. Was arrested for car theft at 15. Was involved in the drugs and alcohol scene. And we weren't really stealing cars. In those days, you could find a car and just turn it over and drive it. We'd drive the car around at night and we'd bring it back and park it.
Joyride.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Joyride.
We'd joyride. And then actually, the night that my buddies got caught, I wasn't even with them, but they said I'd been a part of it. And so I was arrested even though I wasn't even caught. But
guilty by association.
Yeah, and it was, so I was just a young punk in those days. I really was, and with a chip on my shoulder. And it wasn't until, I gave my life to Jesus Christ that all of that changed.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it was most that made you turn into doing those things at that moment? Do you think that it was the effect of at that point in time, your dad was, not, he was drinking, or do you think it had to do with the school system in and of itself not being a part of what you needed it to be? I know I'm going a little out of the way here, but at the same time, like, I find it interesting because a lot of times we don't think about why somebody would go one way instead of the other way, and when they could have taken either or. Yeah.
Well, I grew up a very angry young man. I don't know what it was, but I remember as a teenager, I had a very hard heart. I was very mean and very angry in those days. And I think because I'd suffered abuse, as a child growing up, I'd been sexually abused, which is not something that we like to talk about. When we moved to Detroit, a man in the neighborhood befriended my parents and asked him if he could take me to the park. And I'm 6 or 7 years of age, and he takes me into the park. When he gets me alone in the bathroom stall, he assaults me. And so here I am, a defenseless child. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to learn how to fight. Another time, living in the mean streets of Detroit, we lived right down in the inner city in the late 1950s. My mother sent me, we lived in a second-story apartment above a mom-and-pop grocery store. Mm-hmm. She sent me downstairs to get something from the store. And so when I walked downstairs, I walked into the dark alley, and in between the two buildings, it was solid black, and a man jumped out of the darkness and grabbed me and tried to take my mother's money. So I was fighting and struggling and screaming, and it was summertime. And the reason I remember it was summertime was because our second-story window was just above where that man was assaulting me. Mm-hmm. And my mother came to that window, and that window was wide open, and she started screaming at that man to let me go. Now, I don't know that he was afraid of her, but it was a very busy street, and 50 feet away, there were people out there, so he ran off into the night and let me go. But because of the trauma that I experienced as a child, I grew up a very angry, very bitter, and very hard-hearted young man.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel that when you were able to start boxing, you were able to let a lot of that anger go?
Yeah, I was a very angry boxer, and and I was tough, but I learned, and I used to tell my boxers, tough will get you killed. It's a sport of skill. Toughness is, something in the street. If you're tough and you can stand there and let somebody beat you up all day long, you're going to get hurt. Boxing is the key to boxing is to hit and not get hit. But I can remember one time reaching my hand out in a sparring session in Milwaukee, Wisconsin one time. And this happens all the time in the gym, but I reached my hand out and this guy sucker punched me in the ring. And so I started chasing him around the ring and started cussing him, calling him everything you could imagine, just this vile filthiness coming out of the darkness of my soul. So I needed redemption, and I was going 90 miles an hour down a dead end street, headed to hell, and thank the Lord, something changed, and I gave my life to Jesus Christ.
So what was that?
There was a man. My parents moved into the trailer park when they came out of the cotton fields of Alabama, and we lived in a little bitty trailer with 5 kids, and eventually there were 6. My mother didn't drive. My dad stayed gone all the time, drinking. If he was home, he'd sleep till noon on Sunday and then get up and watch the football games. My mother prayed that someone would come and take her children to church. And lo and behold, a couple weeks later, Pop Sharnick and Stella Tuttle, 2 people from First Assembly of God Church in Kenosha, Wisconsin, knocked on that humble trailer door and said, "We're starting a bus ministry in this church. Would you let your children go?" And I was 11 years of age and was so rebellious, it was unbelievable. But my mother would take a brush, a belt, or a broom, or whatever it was, and she would hit me and make me get on that bus and go to Sunday school. And the summer just before I turned 16, Wally Block was a very wealthy man that had befriended me. He was my Sunday school teacher, and he would come by and take me to a restaurant. And I'd never been to a restaurant. My folks didn't go to restaurants. Maybe if we were traveling back south, we'd stop after Dad drove all night long and eat in a cafe, but we never ever went out to eat. I mean, McDonald's, but never. This man would come by and show me Christian love. And he said to me one summer day, he said, "Kerry," he said, I want to pay your way to camp. I said, "Wally, I don't want to go to camp. I want to pay your way to camp." And I went to camp that summer, and I gave my life to Jesus Christ. And for 4 or 5 months, I was on fire for the Lord, but I kept hanging out with the same guys. And I got back into the world, and it wasn't until I was like 24, married, living like the devil, drugs and alcohol, everything you could imagine, unhealthy, ungodly. And I came home one day, and I had a 2-year-old daughter, and she was sitting in her high chair. And I looked at that little girl, and the Spirit of God just spoke to me and said, "If you don't get your heart right, that child might not ever know me." And something about the love of the child broke my heart. And I gave my life to Jesus Christ. And 3 months later in the fall, I was in Bible college in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Wow. And I think that that's really important because you never know when it's going to come over you. And when you do see it come over someone, or when they realize, or when that moment hits and happens, it's almost like a snap, like that you are able to break that chain, something that people have been praying for you, or you yourself have been praying for, a long time, but you just couldn't let it go. And in that moment, it happened for you again. Like, I knew you had it in you. It just, the wrong things were coming out at that point in time. And I think a lot of times what happens is we're stuck in between 2 worlds, and we can't serve 2 worlds. It's one or the other, with here, this world, or, God's world, And so I think a lot of times, and I don't know, do you feel that so many people are trying to serve 2 worlds and they can't?
Yeah, the thing that I've learned, especially when you're young, now Latrelle's story is entirely different. She was a preacher's kid. She'd been in church her entire life. But here I grew up deeply in the world. and deeply attracted to the lust of this world, the pride of life, all of the ungodly things, and fell in love with the world. But I learned that the world is temporary, and that everything that we do, 1 John 2:15-17 says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, but only he that does the will of God will abide forever. So when the world passes away, that's just like when you pull the plug out of the water in the sink. It's going down the drain. The world is passing away. And the only thing that I can do that's going to matter for eternity is to live for Jesus Christ and to win a soul to go to heaven with me. And so my mind is more focused on eternity than on the temporal these days. But in those days, it was the opposite.
Yeah. It's interesting. So now, Latrelle, I know that sometimes, a lot of times people are like, oh, okay, you were raised in and around church, preacher's daughter. But that also can be very difficult. That also can be very, very pressuring. Do you feel that you had a moment of rebellion as a child because there was an expectation upon you to be just so? Or do you feel that you were able to be open enough to know that in what you were being taught?
Some of both. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was the baby of 9.
Wow.
And my whole family sang, including my dad and his brothers and my mother and her sisters, and then all of us. So I've sang all my life. And always gone to church because Daddy was already a pastor of the church before I was born. However, it doesn't mean you're shielded from everything.
Right.
It was a very legalistic upbringing as far as we didn't have TV. It was a poor church. It was small. Daddy had to work another job as well. Mother worked some. So we struggled in some ways, but we always made it through, and we always had each other. As a young child, though, things that shouldn't happen in a church do. Kerry was talking about being abused.
Yep.
And I never told my mother and daddy, but there were a couple of men in the church who improperly touched me and made advances towards me and did things that would not be accepted, and I didn't tell them, and I didn't tell other people because I was too scared to.
Because you thought they wouldn't believe you, or because you felt like it would disrupt the way things were?
I felt like it would cause a stir and disrupt things, and it's just not something that we talked about. Mm-hmm. And it's not something the church talked about.
Right.
So
did you ever once think that, well, maybe they'll think that it was my fault because maybe my dress was too pretty that week, or, something to that effect? Like a lot of times we often tell ourselves certain things because,
I wondered, what did I do that made them want to do that? Mm-hmm. Did I do something? Was I flirting? Was I,
right?
And mine was more of, let's see, maybe 10 years old and 13 years old.
Oh.
So
wow.
It was something that I didn't understand.
Sure.
And didn't know why. Didn't know what I was supposed to do.
Right.
So I did nothing.
Well.
But at the same time, I always wanted to be good. And I messed up all the time. Don't get me wrong, I messed up.
We all did.
Preacher's kids, and it was 7 girls and 2 boys, and I do feel sorry for my daddy.
7 girls.
But still, there was a desire, always, even when I didn't do what was right. I always had that conscience in me. I always had that spiritual drawing in me, because there's the consistency of hearing the word.
Right.
And there's the consistency of the love of God, even if you go through things. Because, the enemy, he does whatever he can to stop your growth. And I'm talking about your spiritual growth.
Right.
But boy, we were
course.
grounded in the Bible. And I'm talking about grounded, where we had Bible studies and where we had family prayer. And, that wasn't a choice. It was a necessity.
Right, right.
But it was a good one.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of love. So I wouldn't want anybody to think that church was bad.
Right, of course.
I'm just talking about church are still people that sometimes fail and need to go back and repent
Yep.
and need that grace of God.
Yep.
And I would say me too. Now, I say that because of the knowledge that I was raised with and the understanding that I had, you can also, as a church person, think that you're right and everybody else is wrong. And nobody else does. And you can get into that, I see the mote in your eye, but I've got a big beam in mine and I don't even know it. And the Lord did have to show me that when I grew up. He had to show me that I had a beam in my eye that was so big I couldn't see any of my own faults. And boy, it broke my heart. It just broke my heart to think I have been hurting people. I've been putting people down. I've thought things that were not right, that were not what God was thinking about, about other people. It was like, God, I cannot hurt anybody else. And it hurt me so bad, I just sat one day and cried and said, Lord, if nobody else loves me, I know you still do.
Right. Well, that's the hard part, is looking in the mirror, right?
Yep.
Yes.
You look in the mirror and you're just like, okay. But I think that eventually in our lives, by turning to the Lord, by opening our hearts to that, it becomes a lot easier to look at ourselves in the mirror and just know that, and just live with the thought of, can I look myself in the mirror at the end of the day based on what I've done today? And would God be happy with what I've done today? And I have a question that came to my mind for both of you that as you were talking, and it is, a lot of times we come to people who we know don't necessarily believe or are lost. I find that often with kids or with even parents at the school. They aren't raised in that way. And I often find it somewhat like you want to bring them to you. You want to let them know. What do you guys, and each of you can answer this, how do you introduce it without it being in your face?
Well, one of the things the Lord taught me was to get over yourself, because self is a major problem when we're self-focused or we're self-centered or we're thinking, how do I? And let him do it. And even in singing, when I would think, oh, what am I going to sing? And how's it going to be received? And how will it touch hearts? And the Lord, the Spirit spoke to me one time and said, I must sing. And it's like, duh, it's not up to you. It's up to me. Let me sing. Well, it's the same thing with witnessing. It's the same thing as approaching someone in love and then let the Lord lead you as to what needs to be said.
Interesting.
Because he knows what they need to hear. And his words are going to be what will break their stony heart. And I mean that in the best way.
Right, of course. Of course.
And soften their hearts so that they can hear it. And I just always depend on the Lord. I don't always know what I'm fixing to say.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think telling your story is this is me, where I was and where I am. And that's the easiest way to approach somebody. The thing that I found is places like Africa and places like the Dominican Republic, people are very hungry for the gospel. We were at Maimon about 2 weeks ago doing a medical missions trip, and we went door to door telling people about Jesus. And every single door that we knocked on and shared the gospel, every person prayed and said, I want to receive Jesus Christ. I had a similar experience happen when I was in Africa. Be talking to someone, talking to the maid in my room in Johannesburg, and while I'm talking about Jesus, she gets on her knees. I mean, and I came back to America, and I said to someone in the airport, I said, man, I was just in Africa, and all of these people, you know, they were so hungry for the gospel. And I said, I never see that in America. And he said, well, in America, we've been vaccinated to the gospel. I think we've heard it so much in America that people oftentimes don't want to hear it. But when you go to a place where they're needy and they're hungry, they're so open to hear about the love of Christ.
That's interesting in that sense of, I've never thought about it that way of being, you know, vaccinated to it. I think we have, to me, in my opinion, seems like it's just become so controversial in the sense of, you know, not wanting to step on anybody else's toes, that nobody talks about it, period. And that's the enemy coming in and infiltrating and making it so that nobody talks about anything, you know, what they think, whether they're whatever religion or if they believe in God, they just, it's come down to a point where we've allowed ourselves, or some people have allowed themselves to not talk about it because it's become taboo almost. And as opposed to, you know, I don't even know. I think a lot of it too, though, depending on your upbringing, which I've met a lot of people who have been brought up to fear God, fire and brimstone. You don't do this way, you're going to hell, right?
I understand it.
And that, I think, is also something that when young people come to me, like I gifted this boy in my school, he wanted a Bible. I gave him a Bible. And he's like, well, but I don't know what I am. I'm like, you don't have to be anything. You don't have to be of a certain religion. You just have to believe in God and believe in Jesus. Like, you don't, religion is something different. Just start with the Bible, you know, start with the New Testament. I always tell them to start with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Amen.
Because those are the closest words to Jesus that you can get. So I figure those are the best teachings, right? I mean, I study and I learn myself, and I'm much better than I was, 10 years ago. But at the same time, there's just so much. And I think that if anybody's just starting out, that's probably the best place to start. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the Lord has spoken to me while I was down here. We've been here 4 weeks, and I've been such a strong witness here and such a weak witness at home. And when I think about Stephen, who was stoned for sharing the gospel, I just realized that I need to go home and stand up and be a man and do what Jesus said. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. That doesn't mean that's a great commission for all of us. It's an order, but it's also a commission of power. I have commissioned you to go tell the world. Doesn't mean, Christy, that maybe you go to Africa and be a missionary, or you go to, some remote place in Mongolia, but it means as you're going, share the gospel, tell people about Jesus. And I just want to be bolder in my faith when I get back home than I have been, because I've been like Samson down here, like fearing no one because everybody's so receptive. But in but in America, it's like you shy away from it, and I don't think we should.
I find that interesting. Again, in that whole thing, and I think that it's because it's become culturally taboo, and who you talk to about it or tell about it, or also they're like, I'll just slam the door in your face and it doesn't really make a difference, and we shy away from that. We don't want to get into that argument. Like, it seems like everything's an argument in the United States, Well, why can't we just have a conversation? Why does it have to be one? Okay, like, it does it have to be one against the other? Like, this is what I think and this is my opinion. And maybe what I think and I believe, maybe it will rub off a little bit on you, and maybe what you say to me will make me think a little bit differently as well, right? Like, I just feel like there's very little acceptance and there's so much animosity lately that people just can't have an open conversation without somebody jumping down your throat.
Sure.
Well, you talk about taboo. I mean, Paul and Silas were beaten. I mean, Paul was stoned for sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I shouldn't be afraid of some man,
Right.
that's, that doesn't want, you don't want to hear what I'm saying. That's fine. I'll go to the next person. But
Right.
I know in my personal walk, I need to stand up and be like the saints of old and be willing to
Yes.
share the message of Jesus Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. And I'm going to attempt to do that as I return home to America.
And I think we can do it in a way that's not just out there. I think that I think in every conversation that we have, there's some way to insert, whether it be through forgiveness or whether it be through, understanding or whether it be through kindness, when you do something that people are kind of shocked by, like that the whole wouldn't necessarily do, then they're like, well, why would you do that? And it's like, well, because this is what I do. This is how I feel. And I always tell my students, I'm like, I'm planting the seed. You don't know, but what I'm telling you right now, we just did the parables. I did that because we do the fables first, and then we do the parables, and so we compare what's the difference between the two. I'm like, you don't have to believe what I'm saying now. I'm like, but I'm planting the seed that hopefully when you're older or even now, you decide that you want to learn more and be open to what is this that this crazy lady's telling me, right? So I think that there's always those opportunities to plant the seed and hope for growth.
One plants, one waters, but God gives the increase.
Yes.
And sometimes we get into the I'm right and you're wrong state of mind.
Correct.
And that's what most of our argument starts with, I'm right and you're wrong. There's only one truth, and it is that Jesus Christ is the way, because the Bible says so, and there's no other way, and it's the only way that we can get to heaven.
Yep.
However, he is grace and truth. He came and the Bible says that he is grace and truth, okay? So all truth is in him. But we can use this picture as an example. There's all kinds of different pieces to that picture.
Yes.
It's still the picture. There's a lot of different things that a lot of different people understand. And if we would only share it, and what's blue may jump out to you and what's red may jump out to me, and the black may be all that somebody sees because that's what draws their attention. But everybody can see a piece of that picture. Everybody can also see a piece of the truth, and it's not all the same piece. But if we're willing to share, we might find a bigger piece of all truth, because it's not always a right and wrong. Sometimes everybody's got a piece of the right, but we got to be listening. We got to be listening. Now, there is, of course, things that are wrong, but how will you ever even find that out if you're not willing to talk about it?
Yep. That is correct. That is correct. Or seek that, or look at the different things. I know a lot of people are like, well, it's up to interpretation. I'm like, some things maybe, but most of it's pretty straightforward. But a lot of things can be up to interpretation. But and things get twisted and things get changed around, and depending on what this person thinks or that person thinks. But I think it's up to interpretation because of what people were raised to believe, as opposed to actually going and reading it for themselves.
Yeah.
So.
And it's the amount of understanding that has been opened, because it says the Spirit teaches us. It's our teacher. And it brings us understanding and knowledge, okay? So as the Spirit helps us grow, it will open our understanding to something more and something more. And just because we don't understand it yet, doesn't mean that we're wrong.
Exactly.
It means we don't understand it yet.
Tell me about you have created some films, some documentaries. You have a studio in Nashville. You do a lot of work on the filming side. Tell me about what it is that you've worked on in the past and that you are working on for the future.
Well, you know, I guess since we're in the Dominican Republic, I should mention Forgotten No More. I came to the Dominican Republic in 2001, August of 2001, and someone took us to Batey Peligro. And while we were there was a young mother that had wanted to give her daughter to a pastor I was with for him to take her child back to America where she would have a better life. And I thought, man, the life in that Batey was so bad. And we were just in a Batey yesterday. They're still bad, not as bad as they were 20-something years ago. But I went home thinking I wanted to do something about the Dominican Republic. 2 weeks later, we had 9/11 in America. So my mind was off the Dominican Republic. 4 weeks after that, my first wife died of breast cancer. So I didn't think of the Dominican Republic for years and years until my good friend, Dr. Dan Hale, his wife died in 2020. And I saw him right after she died. And he's a doctor, a couple of years older than me, collapsed in my arms, just crying like a baby because he couldn't stand the pain. And I said, Doc, there will come a time when you will enjoy life again. He said, well, I'm going to the Dominican Republic to spend the rest of my life doing medical missions so that I can help people. So he came down there and started doing medical missions for free. So I came back. My second wife and I came down, and at the end of 2020, at Thanksgiving, I spent a week with him, went back into the Bateys. And then we went home, and it wasn't long after that she passed away. But I thought I need to do a documentary. So we came down here. The Sailors brothers, who were filmmakers, and I came down, and we went into the Bateys, and we produced a documentary called Forgotten No More about the poor Haitians that work in these sugarcane villages for starvation wages. I mean, someone told me even yesterday they're still making only $5 or $6 per day. So Forgotten No More. Sadly, you know, we spent a lot of money on that film and we didn't get a distributor. So we've got a very expensive YouTube film, but it's out there and it's called Forgotten No More. You can go to YouTube, look up Forgotten No More and my name and watch that film absolutely for free. And it will open your eyes to, you know, what's going on in the sugarcane villages of the Dominican Republic. Another one that we did was called Hope Lives in Hornwall, about a town in Tennessee where they were losing 2 teenagers per month to fentanyl overdose.
Wow.
And so a local judge sent a letter to every church in the county and said, you've got to help us. Said the court system is being overrun. We can't do this ourselves. Churches got together, formed a coalition, built a Hope Center where they started, for men and women, started sending these young people to these Hope Centers, started winning them to Christ. Latrelle and I were down there several months ago, and one of the pastors said they might lose 1 or 2 a year now instead of 1 or 2 a month.
Wow.
So that film...
That's incredible.
It's all, both those films are available on our website, inyourcorner.tv, but that film won 6 Best Documentary Awards at Christian Film Festivals.
Wow.
And then I, you know, since I'm a boxing guy and I had a television show for 12 years, I interviewed a lot of world champion boxers over the years. So we did a documentary called Fight the Good Fight. And I've got people like Evander Holyfield in there who talks about Mike Tyson biting a piece of his ear off and actually forgiving him because Jesus Christ forgave him of much. So all of these boxers have these testimonies. So all of those films are available at inyourcorner.tv, and we've got one more that we're working on. It's called Exorcism in America, and it's going to be unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Exorcism in America.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very.
And what led you to wanting to do exorcism?
Well, I didn't want to do exorcism, but there's a controversial pastor that lives in Nashville, Tennessee by the name of Greg Locke, who became famous during the COVID lockdown because he wouldn't shut his church down when they were telling everybody to do it. And he started doing exorcisms in his church. And so there was a big topic of conversation for a while. So Kenny Sailors, who's a filmmaker, and I were sitting around talking about, wow, we need to do one called Exorcism in America. So we went to Greg Locke's church and filmed 3 days of where they were physically doing exorcisms. And, and it's amazing. We got footage of them actually doing exorcisms. Then we thought, well, we need to go to SatanCon, which is the largest Satan conference in the world. We went to Boston and filmed some of the foremost, I don't want to say famous, but some of the foremost Satanists in America and got their perspective. We went to Ohio and interviewed the #1 priest in America who was trained at the Vatican to do exorcisms. And so we got, the perspective from, the Satanists, from the priest, from the pastors, and just everybody's perspective. And I think when this film is finished, it's going to knock the socks off people. It's just amazing.
So what is an exorcism like?
Well, what we've seen, and I was scared to death before I'd seen this happen because, you don't play with Satan, but we learned that God is much more powerful than Satan and Jesus Christ is much more powerful. But in a service, when someone would start preaching, people would manifest, meaning they would start having erratic behavior like they were crazy. They would started screaming and hollering and get down on the floor and started, just doing all kinds of crazy motions. And then when someone would start praying over them and saying, come out in the name of Jesus, these people many of them would vomit. They would have, buckets there for them, because it was common, and they'd pray over them. And all of a sudden, they'd say, come out in the name of Jesus, and come out. And after they would pray for a while, all of a sudden that person would become calm and say, I feel relief. And so, exorcism were going on at the time of Jesus. So obviously Satan hadn't stopped his work. So obviously people are still either possessed or, Satan tries either possessed or oppressed by Satan even today. Because, people commit suicide. And
of course.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And you being an educator, I thought you'd find that interesting.
I do find it interesting because I have the one boy that asked me for the Bible. Like I think about him often, and he's a very tormented child. He's a very tormented boy, and so it makes me think of him when you were just talking about that. But yeah,
they went to also a college that a college professor taught on supernatural things, and I believe that he had a lot of documentation as well. And there's a supernatural television program that they went and interviewed the speaker in that program. So there's a lot of interesting information, and it's going to be a barn burner.
Wow. I'm excited. So
well, make sure you get a copy.
I will. Get a
link anyway.
Get a link. Hopefully it'll be on Netflix.
Yeah, amen.
Yes.
We believe in that.
Yep. So tell me about your book. You've written 11, you said, and this is the latest. It's called In Your Corner.
We've written 12. Latrelle and I wrote
12.
Latrelle and I wrote one while we were down here. It's much smaller than that one. It won't be published for a few weeks, but this was number 11. It's just been out a couple of months.
So it's a boxing trainer's tales from Ali to Holyfield. So tell me.
Well, in my journey throughout the years in professional boxing, I actually go back way before Muhammad Ali. When I was a young fellow, 21 or 22, I had a job with a company and was sent to New York to train. And so I heard about the great Jack Dempsey, who was the heavyweight champion of the world back in the roaring 20s. So I went down to Dempsey's restaurant. If anybody's ever watched The Godfather, they pick up Michael to go in front of Jack Dempsey's restaurant. So I went, and Jack Dempsey himself was an old man, probably late 70s, but I was a young kid, 21, 22 years of age, sat down with Dempsey and talked with him. Later that evening, I wanted to meet Rocky Graziano. Paul Newman played the story of Rocky Graziano, and somebody up there likes me. So I found directions to his apartment building, waited till midnight till he got in. He came in, he was walking, and he was kind of tipsy because he'd been out drinking, I think. And so Rocky and I are standing there, and he says, going upstairs, honey. He said, I'll be up in a couple minutes. Rocky and I are standing on the street in New York City, and I said, hey, champ, I'm a middleweight. Do you think I can be the middleweight champion of the world? He grabs my chin and nearly rips it off, and he says, if you get in shape. And then he said goodbye, and he went upstairs. But, I mean, so I tell stories all the way back from Rocky Graziano to Jack Dempsey to Muhammad Ali to Evander Holyfield, who we did a documentary with that I forgot to mention. We also have we spent 2 days with Evander, and we did a full-blown documentary on him, and you can see that at inyourcorner.tv as well. And so if anybody would like that book, if they will send me their physical address, I will send them a copy of that book and in America. And we'll gladly send them a copy of that book.
So, and where do they send? So you have an email, and you have inyourcorner.tv.
Yep.
You have your In Your Corner.
Well, inyourcorner.tv is the place to reach
YouTube.
us. Yeah, there's a place you can go in there and put your name and email address or physical address, and we'll send it out.
Wonderful. And then, so they will send you a free copy of the book. And you have an email address also?
Yeah, it's simple. It's KW, my first two initials, last name Pharr, PHARR, at gmail.com.
Very good. Very good. And so you guys can get a free copy of the book. But I highly recommend that you go and learn more about Kerry and Latrelle because I think that what they're doing, the ministry that they're in, the word that they're working on, the documentaries, all of these things are just very profound and very, very interesting. And if you're looking for that way to get back into or learn more about Jesus, about God, about whatever it is that you are looking for, because so many people today are seeking for something. They just don't know what that is. And I think that you are both key to people wanting to learn more about God, the Bible, and Jesus. So I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank you so much for taking your time before you leave. And again, this was a God thing, right?
Indeed.
Had you not come to go out to dinner with Celie, then I wouldn't have come out and say hello, and then I said, oh yes, and then all of this, it's not, nothing is a coincidence. So,
well,
God's
thank
a
you,
good
Christy.
connector.
Thank you for having us on.
yes, thank you. Any final words?
Well, I used to always tell my boxers, keep your hands up, your chin down, and your butt off the canvas. But in this case, I'll say, if you don't know Jesus Christ, ask him into your heart today so that you can have your eternity secure forever.
And I would just say, if you get down in the dumps, there is magic that happens in heaven when you sing and praise his name. Because singing has lifted me more times than I'm sure many other people know, that singing can lift your spirits. Because it's entering his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise.
Yes.
And I've been singing all my life, and that's the way he ministers to me and through me.
So why don't we end with a song? Want to sing a little something?
Well, sure. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? And all will see how great is our God.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I love that song. Thank you so much again for being here. This is Christy Maggio and What's Up Punta Cana. Until next time, bye.
Bye.
Every Friday at 7 p.m., Punta Cana Hits presents What's Up Punta Cana with Christy Maggio, the #1 English talk show in the area, with the best that the Dominican Republic and the rest of the world have to offer.
Punta Cana Hits, disco novedad.